Greetings and welcome to this book review of Mike Huckabee's book God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy as part of the Faith and Firearms Project, which is a project that studies the intersection of God and guns, faith and firearms, religion, and guns more generally in America. This, as I said, this is going to be a book review of Huckabee's book God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy. If you're not familiar with Huckabee, it's very easy to find information on him. Huckabee was a governor of Arkansas up until 2007, and then in 2008 he made a run for the presidency as a Republican candidate. He of course did not win, and now he is kind of gearing up for another campaign, or he seems to be moving in that direction. And this book, as far as I can tell, is part of that push for his presidential candidacy. So. This review is going to be a little bit different maybe than other book reviews that you've heard. I'm not going to review the entire book sort of chapter by chapter. I'm actually going to focus on one aspect of this book, and that's the aspect of the book that pertains to the Faith and Firearms Project. And that has to do with his arguments related to guns. And these are located primarily in chapter 2. This book is just called Guns and Why We Have Them. With that said, I want to begin with just some general comments about the larger framework he works in, the argument that he's trying to make, and then we'll transition pretty quickly into how he takes that argument and applies it to his thinking on guns. So let's jump right into the material. First slide here. I think this quote represents sort of the heart of the argument that he's trying to make. Quote, "The three major nerve centers of our culture are New York, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles. The nation's finance and fashion center is New York City. D.C. is the epicenter of American politics and government, and Los Angeles is the nexus for entertainment, whether movies, television, or music. They are the three bubbles," I'll explain what he means by that, "of influence in our modern culture, and they are indeed bubbles. I call these cities Bubbleville. I intentionally live in what I call Bubbaville. It's where Bubbas live and where a lot of people who are called by two names: Mary Elizabeth, Catherine Grace, Jim Bob, and Daryl Wayne." So Huckabee begins with this distinction between these cultural epicenters, like you said, New York City, D.C., and L.A., and then kind of the rest of the country, which he calls flyover country. He has a number of synonyms for both the bubbles, Bubbleville and the Bubbaville, and their respective inhabitants. But basically, Bubbaville is what he calls flyover country. And at the heart of his book is this argument that there is a kind of divide between these cultural centers, and I think he sees himself as one who offers a voice, or lends a voice to the inhabitants of Bubbleville, and also as a kind of cultural translator of Bubbleville, or of Bubbaville, to the inhabitants of Bubbaville, and to Bubbleville. Sorry, the Bubbas and Bubbles are getting confused in my mind. And so I think that's how he views himself, as this kind of cultural translator, but also as one who lends a voice to the inhabitants of Bubbaville. And he's going to make an argument that there's a pretty profound disconnect between these various cultural centers, and that will play out for him on a number of different issues, social, political, economic, all of these issues. But it will, for our purposes, we're going to look at how this particular argument plays out in the context of guns. So let's begin by looking at this next quote. "Who are the gun nuts?" Okay, so opening question. "If you live among the urban elites, that is in Bubbleville, you probably think gun owners are. That is, you probably think the people who own guns are the gun nuts. If you live where I do, in Bubbaville, you probably think the real gun nuts are those firearm-fearing folks who, despite years of research to the contrary, still think a so-called gun-free zone makes life safer for the people in it. We know the truth of that bumper sticker whose common sense message has long been the object of their scorn and ridicule. When guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. Anyone who thinks we can simply ban guns and poof make them all disappear, even from the hands of criminals, is deluded." So Huckabee comes out swinging, right? And here you can already see the Bubbaville kind of divide that he's trying to draw attention to, and specifically around the area of guns, that basically where you are on his spectrum will contribute to who you think the real nut is, whether that be the gun owners or the what he kind of pejoratively calls here the deluded inhabitants of Bubbleville. So here you can already begin to see how he takes this bifurcated, this bifurcation of the country and then applies it to guns. Now, after making that initial kind of move of saying, okay, well, people in Bubbleville simply don't understand the people in Bubbaville, and the people of Bubbaville, probably don't understand the position or certainly don't have sympathy for those who would want more gun control or want to ban guns, as he says. He offers 6 arguments here, or 6. I'll just call them Huckabee 6 statements about guns in America. And these, I offer a couple little titles. These are my own, by the way. I derive these from reading the chapter. He doesn't divide chapter 2 into these 6 sections. This is just my own interpretation of the main arguments that he's trying to make. The first one concerns self-defense. The second one concerns ignorance about guns among the inhabitants of Bubbleville. That is the 3 cultural centers, LA, DC, and New York City. And I think he really means all sort of cities and subcultures that are influenced by that worldview. So ignorance among the inhabitants of Bubbleville. He makes the argument that fewer guns equal more crime, and that more guns equal less crime. Fourth, he makes a constitutional argument, not surprising there. Fifthly, he talks about the dangers of disarmament. And then sixth, he'll talk about cross-cultural incompetency, which is really a kind of fancy way of saying that there is the bubbles, the inhabitants of Bubbleville have no understanding of the culture of those who inhabit Bubbaville. So let's begin with the first number one. The first point. He makes a self-defense argument here. Okay, quote, "It's always a surprise to the progressives that if you take protection away from law-abiding people, you virtually assure criminals that when they go on a shooting rampage, they'll be the only ones armed. A gun-free zone is really just a defense-free zone, a designated area where law-abiding citizens have agreed, however reluctantly, to be defenseless. They accept that if a bad guy starts shooting up the place, he'll be the only person armed until the cops can get to the scene. As the saying goes, when second counts, the police are just minutes away. So who are you going to call? Try Smith & Wesson." And these ellipses are to indicate that I've shortened the quote just a little bit. I'm skipping ahead to the quote. "Consider this. Blogger David Barker analyzed 32 shootings, rampages that were stopped by outside intervention. Among the roughly half where an armed citizen happened to be on hand and stop the shooter, the average number of fatalities was 1.8. When the victims had to wait for the police to arrive, the average number of deaths was 14.29. Car 54, where are you?" So the first argument that he's going to make is simply a self-defense one. And it's not just about self-defense, it's also about what he sees as the kind of ridiculous nature of gun-free zones. And this is, Huckabee is not alone in making this kind of argument. This is a very common argument that one finds among gun owners, that occasionally you'll hear gun owners talk about gun-free zones as soft targets, or as places where, or the argument is often made, hey, gun-free zones are those bans are basically going to be obeyed by law-abiding citizens, and so basically the law-abiding citizens are disarmed, whereas the criminals who probably care less about those laws are not going to obey. That's the argument that's typically made, and often tagged on to that is the argument that many of the mass shootings take place in specifically gun-free zones. So Huckabee is, like I said, definitely not alone in making that argument. This is a pretty traditional argument. Second point, ignorance. When I hear people with a profound ignorance of firearms say idiotic things, like I said, he doesn't pull his punches, idiotic things like children shouldn't grow up in a house where there are guns, I want to say more people are killed by cars than guns each year, so maybe children should grow up in a house with no cars around. I grew up with a very healthy respect for guns, but I had an absolute fear of my father. The guns at worst could kill me. I'm pretty sure my old man could do far worse than that to me. It still catches me off guard when I have a conversation with an adult who has never owned a firearm, never fired one, and yet who speaks so passionately against them. How does this staggering lack of knowledge result in such an abundance of opinion? I can see the look of horror on the faces of friends of mine who have spent their lives in New York City when I talk about owning a variety of firearms. It's the look one would get announcing in a synagogue that one owns a bacon factory. So there he makes yet another pretty traditional argument that that the people who are so opposed to guns often have very little firsthand experience with them. And then there's another point I want to lift up here about ignorance, and that concerns yet another example of ignorance that he'll point to is ignorance around quote unquote assault weapons, or sometimes called modern sporting rifles. MSRs is an acronym you often come across, and I just have a picture of one here to the right. And by the way, all these pictures are from Wiki Commons. But this is a pretty standard configuration for an AR-15, or as I said, a modern sporting rifle. And these are let's see. So let's actually look here at the quote. The term assault weapon is one of the most misunderstood designations for a firearm. In a sense, all weapons are assault weapons, even a rock if it's being hurled at someone. When people throw out that term, they typically mean a rifle that looks scary because it resembles the military-style rifles carried by soldiers and SWAT teams. Immediately after the Sandy Hook tragedy, I was in a meeting in New York when the subject of assault rifles came up. The general consensus among those in the meeting was that such a weapon was way too powerful for individuals to own. When I mentioned that I owned more than one, I thought people who were going to dive under the table or for protection. I explained that an AR-15 shoots powerful shells for sure, the 223 or 5.56. I'll explain those terms in a second. Caliber, but it's actually less powerful than the Weatherby 300 Magnum rifle that I hunt deer with. Most people expressing their disdain for the AR-15 do so on the basis of it being called an assault rifle, or because its various features give it a serious or even sinister appearance. Most all those scary features are actually quite practical, like the adjustable stock or the flash suppressor on the barrel, or various options such as a pistol grip on the stock. None of those features have a thing to do with making the gun more deadly. Some even make it safer. I'm not trying to sell the AR-15. My point is that the breathless attempt by the Bubble crowd to ban it is based on ignorance and fear, the very things that the Bubbas are accused of being driven by. What irony. And so he's using here, so back a little bit background here, the AR-15 is by most counts the most popular and highest selling rifle within America. There are an almost endless ways in which one can configure these guns, and many companies. I couldn't even begin to give you a number on the number of companies that sell this particular rifle and sell it in this particular caliber. I had mentioned earlier that I would talk to you about that caliber. The numbers 223 and 5.56 are caliber designations. They have to do with the diameter of the bullet. And so he makes a comparison here between 223 and his 300 Magnum rifle. And so the 300 Magnum is, in terms of bullet size, a much larger bullet. You can find a lot of information on this kind of stuff just by going to Wikipedia or something. Just type in 223. The number 5.56 is the NATO designation, because this caliber is very common among the NATO nations, and so and is found throughout the military. And so 223 or 5.56 are essentially is basically the same bullet. 300 Magnum much larger. So that's the comparison that he's making there, is that the AR-15 is actually a much smaller and less powerful cartridge when compared to this other cartridge that he uses, this other rifle he uses for his hunting, that is the Weatherby 300 Magnum. So again, this has to do with his argument about ignorance, of the people who want to ban these things simply have little exposure to them, and whatever knowledge that they bring is often incorrect. Okay, let's go to the third argument that he makes. Fewer guns equal more crime, and more guns equal less crime. Again, not an uncommon argument, not one unexpected. One can kind of hear in a lot of his arguments the work of the economist John Lott, who is often found in the midst of these gun debates. He's spent a lot of time on TV. Just type in John Lott, L-O-T-T, and you'll find him commenting on these issues. He wrote a book that's gone through several versions called more guns, less crime. And has been, of course, very controversial, but it's often at the heart of these conversations. So maybe something you'll check into later. So he says, fewer guns, more crime, more guns, less crime. Quote, a study by Mark Gaius of Quinnipiac, sorry if I mispronounced that university, published in Applied Economics Letters showed that left coast bubbleheads and east coast bubble dwellers just can't believe that if guns are taken away from people who haven't broken the law, gun violence will increase. Conclusions were based on data gathered between 1980 and 2009, so this represents one of the most significant longitudinal surveys ever done on the effect of gun laws on gun violence. Overall, the study showed that gun-related murder rates were 10% higher if a state had more restrictive laws related to concealed carry. Perhaps even more startling to the Hollywood hypocrites who fill their movies with violence and their pockets with profits, but who think Southern gun owners like me are the problem, is this inconvenient truth. Banning so-called assault weapons results in murder rates that are 19.3% higher than when no such laws are in effect. So here again, he's making the argument that the more, if guns are actually taken away, it will result in increased criminal gun violence. Okay. His next argument is a constitutional argument. Again, it's not at all surprising that he would make this argument based on the founding documents of the country. Unfortunately, much of the discussion over firearm ownership centers on hunting, with anti-gun activists always insisting their new restrictions would not infringe on hunting. But the Second Amendment isn't about hunting. The Second Amendment is about preserving all the rights we possess as citizens. The Bill of Rights is not about restricting the activities of the people. There's absolutely nothing in the Bill of Rights that tells a citizen what he or she is prohibited from doing. The Bill of Rights explicitly tells government what it can't do, and to make sure the government didn't dare try to take those rights away, our founders followed up the First Amendment with the Second, which grants citizens the right to bear arms. As radical as it sounds to us today, the purpose of the Second Amendment was not to guarantee us the right to hunt deer, but to make sure we can protect our freedoms from those who would take them away, including our own government, should it become as tyrannical as the one that launched the revolution in the first place. So, like many gun owners, Huckabee is going to make the claim that the Second Amendment functions as a kind of soft check and balance, right? As a way of preserving liberty over and against tyranny. Okay, number 5. Here he's going to talk about the dangers of disarmament, and he's going to use an argument that you encounter quite a bit, which has to do with a kind of historical analogy, or referring back in particular to the disarmament of Jews during the reign of Nazi socialism. On 3 different occasions, I've been to Auschwitz and Birkenau, the infamous Nazi death camps about an hour from Krakow, Poland. I've made repeated trips to Yad Vashem, which is a Holocaust or Shoah museum in Jerusalem, the memorial to the victims of the Holocaust, and to the Holocaust Museum in D.C. A haunting question has always been, why did the Jews obey the Nazis and march from their homes and businesses to the train stations, boarding cattle cars so that they could be hauled off to camps of mass murder and torture? The inescapable conclusion, at least in part, because the Nazis had guns and the Jews didn't. The Nazis had systematically removed all firearms from Jewish homes. Ownership or possession of guns by Jews was outlawed. From the New York Times on November 8, 1938, the Berlin police president, Count Wolf Heinrich von Helldorf, announced that as a result of police activity in the last few weeks, the entire Jewish population of Berlin had been disarmed, with the confiscation of 2,569 hand weapons, 1,702 firearms, and 20,000 rounds of ammunition. Any Jews still found in possession of weapons without valid licenses are threatened with the severest punishment. So here again, I think there's a close connection between his concern here with disarmament and then the last slide here, which has to do with his constitutional claims. And basically, he's saying that disarmament is a strategy that's been used in the past as a way of making a population vulnerable. And so I think on the one hand, he's saying this should be avoided. And then on the other hand, he's saying the founding documents of the country guarantee that such a thing would never happen. The analogy with with Nazi socialism is again found throughout a lot of the pro-gun material that you'll come across, and other moments of disarmament have also been referenced apart from Nazi socialism, but he doesn't actually make those references here. You'll find those elsewhere. Okay. And sixth and finally, cross-cultural incompetency. I don't expect that everybody living in urban areas will come to understand life in the land of God, guns, grits, and gravy. But if you don't understand it and have no clue as to why we live or believe as we do, then please just leave us alone and let us go on believing that the Second Amendment exists. Not so we can hoard guns, but so we can hoard liberty. Do us that favor, and when the barbarians show up at your door and you frantically phone us for help, maybe we'll loan you a gun. And so this is kind of how he starts to wrap up, how he wraps up chapter 2. And basically, again, he's taking another shot at the Bubbleville folks, and basically saying that, you know, I don't need you to understand us or even to agree with us, but leave us alone, right? Let us do what we want to do, and maybe there will come a time when you actually can appreciate, a time of crisis when you will appreciate guns in the hands of citizens. I want to conclude this little review with a couple lines from Lynyrd Skynyrd's "God and Guns," which is a 2009 song. He actually, interestingly, quotes Lynyrd Skynyrd not from this particular song, actually from The Simple Life. I think that's what it's called, or simply Simple Life. But to my mind, Lynyrd Skynyrd's song "God and Guns" actually summarizes lyrically what I think Huckabee's trying to do, and even assumes this kind of divide between Bubba and Bubbleville. So let me just read this out loud. Last night I heard this politician talking about his brand new mission. Liked his plans, but they came undone when he got around to God and guns. I don't know how he grew up, but it sure wasn't down at the hunting club, because if it was, he'd understand just a little bit more about the working man. God and guns keep us strong, that's what this country was founded on. Well, we might as well give up and run if we let them take our God and guns. And so I encourage you to listen to that. Of course, for copyright reasons, I can't play that on this video. But what I have found is that this song, God and Guns, really does reflect, I think, what's at the core of Huckabee's book, which is this dichotomy between those who understand the Bubbas, the inhabitants of Bubbleville, and those who do not understand it, and also the tension that arises around guns because of that lack of understanding. Well, thank you for watching this review. If you have any comments, or if you have other books that you'd like me to look at, or even other videos, anything you'd like me to review, contact me. Send me an email to faithandfirearms007@gmail.com. Or if you are interested, for instance, in being interviewed, or in talking to me a little bit about your own views about faith and firearms, or the current debate in America today, again, just email me, faithandfirearms007@gmail.com. Love to see what you have to say, and I'd love to see any recommendations you have for future reviews. Again, thanks for watching.